Well, Voice Lessons is my kind of book. It's written by Eve Krakow. It's a collection of personal essays about an introvert's struggle to find her voice as a singer, a writer, a mother, and yes, even a human being. I really enjoyed it. And Eve Krakow joins me now. Thanks for being here, Eve.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first off, what prompted you to do this book as a memoir and essays?
Well, it sort of came together. I mean, I've been writing, it's stories I've been writing over, a long period of my life. And at a certain point, I just decided I really, it was always my dream to publish a book. So I decided to try and put them together in book form. And so I put things together, and then I saw that, there were gaps. And so, I worked on some things, and I guess, I call it a memoir and essays because it really is about a specific period in my life, but sort of it told in episodes. It's not like a linear necessarily story. So I guess that's kind of how it came together.
Episodes is a good way to put it. I'd love to see this as a TV series because every week is an episode, and there's like time traveling. 1 minute you're in current day. 1 minute you're flashing back to when you were a kid, when you were with your parents. So you really go back and forth, and it flows well actually.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, well, it's sort of, I mean, even the stories that I wrote more recently, there's a lot of reflecting back and making connections with, things that are happening now, things that were happening then. And I had thought at one point, I tried at one point that I put the manuscript together more chronologically, but in the end, I did it more by theme, and that seemed to make more sense in the end. But
exactly. So, how long did it take you to write this book?
So that's a hard question to answer because, as I say, the stories in them, some of them I wrote a long time ago. Like I think the earliest one, which is the first one that opens the book, is I wrote like 20 years ago or something. But then there are some that were just written a couple of years ago that are more recent. But like I say, there was a certain point a number of years ago when I decided, okay, I want to put these together as a book. And from that point, I guess it was a couple of years of reworking some of the stories and writing some new things. And then there's the whole, once you have a manuscript, there's the whole submitting to the publishers. And then I kind of did a first round and nothing happened. And then I kind of reworked some things and did a second round. And then there's even a gap between the time, if it was accepted in 2021, but it didn't actually come out till 2024 because they said, well, we'd love to have you, but we have things lined up. Are you okay? So it's a long process.
So one of the themes that resonates in your book, you were such a spokesman for this type of life that my good friend Sean Appel had you on as a guest because you're shy. You've been shy all your life. And this is something that you share in the book a lot.
Yeah. I guess, and I guess for me, writing was always a way to kind of deal with that shyness because I always found it easier to express myself in the written word when I have time to think about it. But obviously in the book, the voice lessons theme, it's because I've always been doing singing and theater, and that was sort of my, it's a bit of a contrast, but I that was kind of how I in a way not overcame my shyness, but it was like a different outlet. It was a way of expressing myself, and yeah, and I'm hoping the stories in there, it talks about shyness, different aspects in different contexts, and I'm hoping it resonates with other people who've had similar experiences in everyday life.
What went into you actually finalizing the actual title for the book? Because voice lessons later in the book does come up in one of the chapters, the word voice lessons. How did you decide that was going to be the name of my book?
So when I first put together the manuscript, I had a different working title. I was actually going to call it Stage Fright. And then a friend of mine, another writer who read it and was giving me feedback, she said, I really feel like voice is a theme here. And she said, because she was saying that she felt that voice worked on many different levels. And I thought about it and I thought, I guess she's right. And then we brainstormed, and then it was somebody else who suggested, well, how about voice lessons? And eventually I decided to go with that because it works on the different levels, both for the actual voice lessons, because there's some stories in there about working with my singing teacher, but then there's voice, in the figurative sense, and developing one's voice as a writer and just kind of in life, and then it comes in other ways too as a theme. So it seemed to tie everything together.
So what role we see your participation in the Gilbert and Sullivan play and all kinds of stuff like that. What role did singing play in maybe helping you deal with your shyness, or like I said, kind of, and something that you can tell other young people how to deal with it?
Well, I definitely think it was really important because it was when I was younger, it sort of felt like that was something I was good at. It was something I enjoyed. It was something I could do. It was also a way of connecting with other people. Like when I was in elementary school, I was part of a choir, and so, and when you're shy, I mean, I had friends, but it's nice to feel that you're part of. I wanted to feel that I was part of a group, that I kind of belonged, and so definitely the singing, there was that aspect that definitely helped. And then, I'd say later in life, I always found singing and being on stage, I don't know, somehow it's different from everyday life because you're playing a character and you know what you're going to do in advance. You've rehearsed it. It's not, so I mean, yes, I'd always be nervous before going on stage, but I don't know, it was very different. So for me, it was a really good way of I don't know, just being out in the world, I guess.
One of the most clever parts of the book that I really enjoyed, and it's only about 2 pages, is you have a mini chapter and it's all a crossword puzzle about, things in your life. Um, that must have taken an awful lot of time to put that together. And of course, a reader could go through the crossword puzzle and try to fill it out themselves. And then they could cheat like me and flip to the next page and see all the answers. That was pretty clever.
Yeah, so at one point a few years ago, I took a workshop with a writer who was introduced me to what she called outlier forms, which are short forms that are a bit different than your standard kind of traditional narrative. And one of the types, it's called a hermit crab essay. And it's basically when you take the structure of something else in life, like, I don't know, like a quiz or a menu or a how-to manual, but you use it to tell your story. And, and she had many examples of this, and we played around with it in the workshop. And then this was a piece, the theme in that for the crossword puzzle. Anyway, it was something I tried writing in different ways. And I have to say it. So at one point, I read somebody else's work who had written something as a crossword puzzle, and it just kind of clicked. And I said, oh, that's good work for what I'm trying to do. And so that's where the idea came from. So it's sort of like a playful way of approaching a theme, but also it can be a way of getting at things that are more difficult to talk about, but in an easier way. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's all that one. There's also for people who are Jewish or people who are not Jewish, you give a nice education on different Jewish customs. So for someone who's Jewish, they pretty much understand, but for a reader who's not Jewish, they're going to learn something from this.
Yeah, I guess so. I never thought of it that way, but it's true. And it's partly because I was learning as I was going along because well, as I explain in the book, I grew up in a family. My parents were Jewish, but we were not a religious or observant household. We had a couple of traditions, but really, I wasn't immersed at all in like the Jewish tradition or community or anything. So yeah, a lot of it was sort of exploring things as I was writing the story. For example, I have that interview where I went and interviewed a rabbi, and that was something very new for me. And my life has changed quite a bit since then, as also I go into in the book. But yeah, it is educational.
So the real mystery in that book, which had me on the edge of my seat, and I couldn't wait to interview you, is the section on the door. Did you get the mezuzah or not? There was should we get a mezuzah? Should we not get a mezuzah? Why is there a mezuzah there? It was already there when you bought the house. It's a dilemma that perhaps a lot of Jewish families who are not religious have. So did you get a mezuzah in the end?
Well, so the thing is, we do actually have one that was given to us as
It was
a
in a
gift.
box. It was in a box.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I feel like I shouldn't say whether we put it up or not. I'll leave that up to
Let's
you.
leave it up. Let's make that a real big mystery for the readers. And maybe for the second book, we'll have a rabbi come to your house, and that'll be the first chapter. So we'll leave that to the guessing. But I was really sitting there and I was waiting. Okay, is it going to go up? Is it not going to go up? It was, anyhow, it's a good laugh, So, on a somber note, you talk about family a lot in the book, and you lost your mom at a young age. And that's something that you share with the readers. That's never easy.
No, I'd say a couple of those stories were the more difficult ones to write, but also, rewarding in a way to be able to have something. At one point I was interviewing my uncle I was doing a story which was more about my grandfather, but ended up kind of also being about my grandfather and also kind of about my mother. And, he told me a lot of stuff I didn't know. And yeah.
Yeah, well, you went out to St. Lazare, and you learned a lot about your grandmother Clara, could have been a world famous pianist, and they needed her to do other things in the family, and I'm not going to give everything away, but it was very interesting. You talk about your dad, and you weren't particularly close with your dad, and you share that. And we see a lot of that in authors. Either you were close with your dad, you're not close with your dad. But I have to ask, because it's not clear in the book, is your dad still with us?
No, he passed away. Actually, it's been 10 years now.
Okay. Okay.
So in some of the stories at the time I wrote them, he was still alive. And then I think the last one, he was not, the one where I talk about walking.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, I mean, you had a challenging relationship with him. I guess your siblings did too. But yet you were very caring of him in his last years, where he developed Parkinson's disease, and we all know how terrible it is for anyone when you lose your independence, and you talk about that.
Yeah, and it was something which it's always when you look back on these things that you understand more. Like I think I hadn't quite put myself in his shoes until later when I was working on the story. So
yeah. And we do have some nice stories about the family trips to Vermont, where you went there, and this was such a fun place. So many people could relate to that, though I didn't have a country home, but those that did. And the sadness you felt when your father decided he was going to sell it.
Yeah, and I think our family, we all kind of regret a bit that we couldn't hold on to that place, but there were no other options at the time. But yeah, I realized, looking back, and again, it's sort of, as I write these stories, I think about these things, having that place to go. It really was a big part of my upbringing, because it was out of the city, and I was free to roam the fields, and it was very different from being in the city. So definitely played a big part of my life. And I think also the proof is both my sisters now live out. They both live out in the country now. So I think I'm not the only one who is affected.
When back to the beginning of the book, you share a scenario that we've all experienced, whether it's at a shopping center or at an airport. In your case, it was on a metro where you bump into someone you haven't seen for ages, and you literally have 3 stops to catch up, knowing that you may never see that person again. That is obviously a true story.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah. That was yeah, and that was the type of thing, like it happened, and then I thought right away when I got home, I was like, I have to write about this because
Yes.
I was just, I don't know, it was just one of those things. Yeah, how do you sum up what you've been up to, in just a couple of words, and that's it. I actually, somebody I don't know if I don't think I ran into him once again a couple of years later, but it's not somebody I run into regularly,
But you
that's for
didn't, you
sure.
didn't, you didn't write down his email address or anything, so you could send him a copy of the book.
uh it was many years ago when I saw him. It was
Okay.
way before this book came about, so yeah.
Yeah.
um
So
I'll find him on Facebook.
similar to that scenario, it's, the situation when someone gets an email from someone they haven't heard from forever because someone just reaches out, and it happens to us. It's happened to me by email a lot because a lot of people know who I am. It's happened by Facebook. And so in one particular case, someone from your past emails you, and it brought back all these memories, and you had a diary to go back to. You actually kept a diary that you still had, and you were able to make that pretty much into a chapter, which delves into again your shyness and your interaction with others. Again, and a very interesting storyline.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy that I've held on to all those diaries and journals. I mean, I kind of cringe when I look back at them, but it does give me insight into what I was thinking and feeling at the time, because, it was, I was a teenager and the feelings were very, very strong. And so, yeah, I was able to draw on that to create that story. And
You talk about meeting your soulmate, Michael, and also your 2 kids. And that's why off air I asked you how old they were, because it's impossible to figure out from the book. And have all your family members, your sisters, your children, your husband, have they all read the book, and have they given you any feedback?
so, first, I want to say I did change everyone's names in the book, so that's actually not their full name.
Okay. All right,
But
interesting. Michael is not your soulmate.
Michael is not his real name. But anyway, but he
Another
chose
mystery.
that
Another
as his
mystery.
name.
Okay.
So yeah, my husband has read it more than once, because he read earlier versions and then he read the final version and he caught a couple typos. My sisters both read it. I gave them early copies as soon as I think with them, I sent them a couple of stories where they were in them, and then I sent them the book as soon as it came out. So far, no one has complained about anything that I've put in there. Some people say they remember things a bit differently or whatever, which is, how things go. Um, but mostly, they've been, the feedback has been positive. My son has not read it. My daughter has read some of it, and she said it was kind of cool to read about things that happened either before she was born or before she really remembers, because in the
Right.
stories she was really, really
Right.
little. So,
Right. So to
yeah.
wrap this interview up, you have a short reading for us. So why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So I thought I'd read just the beginning of the story, Between the Rows. I don't think I need to really introduce it. I think it's self-explanatory. So, Between the Rows. My mother showed me how to plant peas when I was 6 years old. Make a row of holes in the earth with your finger up to the second joint, about an inch apart. Drop in the seeds, little white pills. Cover them and gently pack the earth. We'd water them, and a week or two later, there would be little sprouts poking through the earth, tiny stems with tiny leaves. We lived in the city, but on weekends and during summer vacation, we'd escape to the country house my father had built. That's where the garden was, a land of barns and hay silos and tractors and cows. The smell of fresh manure permeated the car as we drove past fertilized fields. Gravel crunched under the wheels when we turned down our driveway. My mother would set to pulling out the weeds that had flourished during the week. Some were as tall as the vegetable plants themselves, stretching their stems and flaunting their leaves as they sought to choke out their rivals. Up to the second joint, to be honest, although I remember the words, I can't remember her voice. She died when I was 10 years old. When I replay my memories, I don't know what voice to give her. My father sold the country house a few years ago. He was in his late 70s. His health had deteriorated and he could no longer make the drive. While packing, sorting, and culling books, my stepmom found a hardbound notebook with a blank cover. She handed it to me without explanation. I opened to the first page. Vermont, May 7th, 1977. A shiver started at the back of my neck, traveled down my arms, brushed my skin. My mother's handwriting. I flipped the pages one by one. A gardening journal, seed varieties and quantities, what had worked, what hadn't. The musty scent of old paper rose as I fingered the smooth corners. And I will stop there.
Well, and that was a very touching piece and a very nice tribute to your mom and your dad, actually. So it is a terrific book. And tell us where it's available.
So it's available any of the usual places, Indigo, Amazon, the small bookstores, a couple of the independent bookstores in Montreal have it. I know there's currently copies also at Indigo downtown, so you can order it online, buy it through a bookstore. It's at the Jewish Public Library. Sorry, not the Jewish Public Library. I don't know if they have a copy. I was going to say the Cote-saint-Luc Library. It's at the Cote-saint-Luc Library.
Perfect.
And a couple of other libraries too. I think Montreal West Library also. So yeah.
All right. Well, first of all, it's an excellent book. I want to thank you for reaching out to me and being so persistent, because that's how I do my reviews. I do one a month, and and I look for local authors. So congratulations again. Thanks for your time and good luck.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really been fun.
Great. Eve Krakow has been my guest.